Yeah. Now, what I would like to do is I'd like to back up some of what Mr. Campbell was talking about there with some teaching and learning information. The reason why I do this at this information session is because it's useful for some things that parents and the students have heard. Obviously, a lot more information is handed over to students during the course of the year in classrooms, but this is a good opportunity. So my thing is about trying to be the best that you possibly can be. So if we know a bit more information about teaching and learning and how learning works, then we can help ourselves a bit more. We obviously know that during the course of this year you've got a lot of stuff that you're going to be asked to hand in, to think about, to learn, and then doing assignments and exams. So there's a lot of work to do. Most students find this at the very least hard work, and some find it stressful at times. But there are ways of minimizing your stress and maximizing your success. Some of the common complaints, fairly obviously, are that there's not enough time and that there always seems something else due. So what we'd like to do is maybe work as smart as we possibly can so we can reduce some of that stress, because being stressed in and of itself does impact how well we do. So unless we work smarter, we may feel we're stuck in a state of permanent catch-up, or we might feel that we've reached our academic limit, we can't do any better. Usually we're wrong in that case. We might think that unless we forego sleep and exercise and all the other things, social life, there won't be enough hours available to do study well. So there's a guy called Newport, and I introduced this person to Year 11s last year, so you might remember this. There's a guy called Newport. Now, he did really well at school and went through to university and actually studied study success and how to study successfully. I suggest it's worthwhile having a look at his blog. He's got some really good information there, and he's published 3 or 4 books on how to work smart and how to get really good grades. Newport says that this idea that there's not enough time is actually false. He said the problem is not the number of hours that are available, but rather how each hour is spent. Now that's obviously easy to say, but he says that as humans, our minds have evolved to prefer short-term tasks, such as running away from a lion or just finding something to eat. Therefore, if you set yourself up for a whole weekend of assignments with the goal of finishing all your homework and writing an essay, your brain is a bit stressed straight away. It's not happy. So we need some way of dealing with that. It's really hard to focus for a long time. Fatigue sets in. Our concentration wanders, and then every distraction will suddenly seem impossibly appealing. For example, our social media, Netflix, our phone, our laptop, the tablet, and generally any other technological distraction machine that all of our clever technology companies have invented. Before you know it, the day's over, and you'll realise you haven't accomplished much productive work at all, and then stress sets in. The next day, new assignments pile onto those you didn't finish on Sunday, and the tedious process starts all over again. And Mr. Campbell alluded to this. So one way of thinking about your task is a simple formula. Basically, the work that you get done, the accomplishments are time spent times the intensity of focus. So if you spend a lot of time, your focus goes down and your accomplished work will drop off. So the only way of dealing with that sort of thing is to make sure that you're increasing the intensity of focus when you are actually working, so that even if you spend the same time, and you may spend less, your work accomplished will go up, even though you spent the same amount of time. Now, wouldn't that be lovely? A term that Cal uses is pseudo-working, and he says that that's when you look and you feel like you're working, but you're actually not being productive. So pseudo-working is really low-intensity work. It's stuff when you're distracted or you're not focused as well as you possibly could be. And therefore, what happens then is you spend a long amount of time and your thinking and your work is inefficient. So we're just trying to increase that efficiency. Now, some of that information I gave last year, and I told the Year 12s about that, and I had a few tips and tricks on how to think about getting around that. Some of the other stuff that I found out during the course of the year is that there's a lot of research around particularly looking at multitasking, media multitasking in particular. And so that's when you've got something like music or some video going, or the other type is if you've got social media going, either on the same machine or if you've got your mobile phone sitting there with Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever it is you're using. Now this has all been put together in one particular paper that I read, and these some information you might find useful when you're deciding on how to set your work up for a particular session. One thing they found was that media multitasking interferes with attention and working memory, negatively affecting GPAs, test performance, recall, reading comprehension, note-taking, self-regulation, and efficiency. So they're talking about having some music distracting you in the background. Another one was that students struggle to accurately assess the impact that media multitasking will have on their academic performance. So not only does it affect your performance, it's actually quite hard to work out how much it's going to affect your performance. Usually we underestimate it. Another one is that empirical studies firmly establish a significant drop in academic performance due to media multitasking. And again, that's music going on in the background, but it's also when you've got social media going as well. And one of the ways in which obviously that happens is if you're using the text function to have a conversation with somebody, and every now and again you get an alert and you answer your phone, and then you get back to your work, and it distracts the way in which you can pay attention to your work. Now it sounds very obvious, but until you study these things, you don't realize how significant the impact is. So one of the experiments that was done was around students doing a lot of texting, a medium amount of texting, and a low amount of texting. And the group that they studied that were doing the high amount of texting, they found this, that students in the high text messaging group performed worse by 1 letter grade. So that's the same as dropping from an A to a B or a B to a C. By 1 letter grade on an information post test. So they did the experiment and they tested to see how well people could retain the information. Now that was regardless of gender, and it was regardless of whether you were already in the A group or the B group or the C group or the D group. So it affects everybody regardless of how well you're doing already. So that's something to pay attention to, particularly when you're really pushing to do your best this year. Now, when I'm talking about multitasking, I'm not talking about when you've got your phone or your laptop hooked up to a chat room because you're actually working with a group actively there and then on a piece of work. Because in that case, the media and the texting is actually the work that you're doing. That is the instrument of thinking. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when you've got your phone on and you're having a conversation in parallel. Because your brain learns from what it's doing. So if you're teaching it to fragment its attention, you're learning how to be a person that has fragmented attention. And that's a big problem. That's a big problem for adults. This effect is also in university people as well. So some of this study was done with school students, and some of it was done with university students as well. So how do you avoid this pseudo work thing? The first thing you can do is plan your learning time so you know you clear the decks, you're ready and you're fresh and you're ready to go. Planning every day is good. Use your diary. That's a good tool to use. Turn off all your social media and phones during and after your study when you're doing your catch-up work and your revision. So whenever you're actually actively engaged in your material, your phone not only should be off, but it's actually found that even if you've got the phone off next to you, it actually is distracting because your brain's thinking about, if I turned it on, would I have a message from somebody? So it's a good idea to turn it off and put it somewhere that's not even in the same room because it still has an effect. Start all assignments the day you get them, or at least planning them out, as Mr. Campbell said. Make sure you get the earliest start you can so you can flatten that work curve the amount of effort you have to put in when everything's starting to happen all at the same time. So get them started. And plan to finish all your assignment days or a week before the due date. Again, that information's already come across from Mr. Campbell. It's worthwhile having a look at the Newport materials. Just one further piece of information on the study around multitasking. Multitasking is a word that we use, but in actual fact you do not multitask. You share attention, your brain is switching between one thing and another, and you only have a certain amount of attention. What happens is you end up with an information bottleneck. So your brain gets to a stage where it actually cannot take in information in two channels at once. So it'll only be watching one or the other. And if it gets attracted to the one that you think is more interesting, which is probably a conversation with your friends, then that's the one that's going to take your attention. Now, that's got a big problem if you measure two things. If you measure whether you can remember the basic factors, that doesn't seem to get us as affected. What does get affected is if you then have to use that information for problem solving. So your understanding rather than just remembering is the bit that gets impacted. That's bad news for senior secondary, because that's obviously where you want to be able to get top marks on those ISMGs and on the external exams, is on actually demonstrating your understanding. So I hope that was worthwhile. Just a few things just to think about. I'm not saying do one thing or another, but the more information you guys have and the more information your parents have, the more we can sort of partner up and get through this year as successfully as we possibly can.